Like I said, it's a 1967 Piper Aztec twin-engine airplane. Seats 6 people, has 2 engines, piston powered, 250 horsepower side, and all weather. Actually, I forgot to show you, these rubber things inflate. The engines have to be running because you need vacuum pressure from the engine, but they inflate, and then they're on for like 30 seconds and then off for 30 seconds. I'm sorry, on for 30 seconds and off for 2 minutes, and then on for 30 seconds. So they will knock off any ice that accumulates. So they're de-icing boots. So it's theoretically an all-weather airplane, but you know, if it's icing fast, you don't want to be in it in this. Holds 140 gallons of fuel, burns about 25 gallons an hour. So you can go about a good 5 hours. So you can go about 900 to 1,000 miles with 6 people. Okay, so when I first got this airplane in 2000, it had the original panel from 1967, which didn't look anything like this. I mean, some of the same instruments, but they were all scattered. So and among other things, I probably put 800, 900, maybe 1,000 hours of my own time. I have an aircraft mechanics license, so I probably put 800, 900, maybe 1,000 hours into, over the years, working on it, kind of restoring the airplane. One of the things we did was tore out the old panel, put in a new panel at a radio shop in Clintonville. Let me just get we won't get satellite. This is a GPS. We won't get satellite reception because we're in a hangar. But so the aircraft really has the same equipment as a lot of the older airliners. Nowadays they're kind of all glass cockpit, which this doesn't have. These are all analog gauges, and I'll show you what the gauges individually do when we get back to the class. But basically this kind of just shows you, these are gyros and they turn at between 8 and 10,000 RPM. So when it was so cold, you don't want to turn them on. So that's why I came out here, put the heater in them. So, but basically, the aircraft will handle all, I mean, you know, you have to have the right training, but the aircraft will handle all kinds of weather. Bad weather, good weather, I mean, flying in the clouds, no problem. It's set up to do single pilot instrument flying, or IFR, instrument flight rules, single pilot work. And basically, that's about it. All the navigation stuff, like this is a navigation instrument, this is a navigation instrument, this is GPS. We'll talk more about that when we get back to the classroom there and show you. But so yeah, I mean, you know, there isn't a ton of room in here. It's a really good 4-person airplane because you could put 4 people, as much baggage. You can put 150 pounds of baggage up there. Maybe it's 100 pounds up there. It's and 100 in back of the back seat. And so you can really, there's a baggage door back there, and you can, you know, if you had 2 kids or just 4 adults, most of the time I have the back seat out. My partner put it in because he's got a couple of grandkids that he takes. So, but it's a pretty comfortable airplane on a flight. You know, on a long flight, you have some room, especially if you don't have anybody in the back. You have some room that you can stretch out. You know, you can take the seat out of there if you want to and kind of lay down if you're flying, or, you know, not the pilot, of course. But it's got a fully functional autopilot. This is the autopilot here. It's not doing anything now because we're not in the air, obviously, and you use these as controls. It's got storm scope, which lightning strikes, not weather radar, so it doesn't show color, but it shows lightning strikes. Some of these flight instruments over here were over here, and I have different ones, and then I had to buy 1 or 2 more, and I put the ones that were over there over here. So all I really need is another airspeed indicator to, like, maybe move this down here, put an airspeed indicator there, and then I'd have duplicate instruments on each side for redundancy, that kind of thing. Basically that's about as exciting as it gets, you know. So we can make airplane noises, but other than that, the airplane will go, we don't have oxygen in here, so if you go more than 12,000, 13,000 feet above the ground, you got a problem. So you need oxygen any time you're above that, or the pilot does, and the passengers for over 30 minutes. But but you can get like portable oxygen kits that you bring a little tank along, and you have masks for people, and they can. So you could actually get up to 14, 15,000 feet with it to get above some weather. But the engines are not turbocharged; they're normally aspirated. They're fuel injected, but they're not turbocharged, so you don't get a lot of manifold pressure up there. I mean, where at cruise the manifold pressure, of course, it's close to 30 inches now, but when you're running, it's suction. So the manifold pressure is probably 24 to 25, maybe 24 inches at takeoff. You might be at 18 inches up at 13, 14, 15,000 feet. But the air is much thinner up there. There's only, at 18,000 feet, there's only half an atmosphere. So at 13, 14,000 feet, there's probably less than two-thirds of an atmosphere. So you're moving faster through the air, and even though your indicated airspeed might only say 160 or 70 miles an hour, you're probably going closer to 200 miles an hour through the air way up there. And then, of course, if you have any wind blowing you, your ground speed is faster. But
so, Tom, are there certain instruments that you use more than others, or some that you use more when you take off or land, as opposed to?
You don't really. The only one that you really use taking off and landing is the airspeed indicator, just as a reference to make sure, because wings work because there's air going over the wing and there's a pressure differential. It's lower pressure above and higher pressure below, and that's why the airplane flies. So the whole secret is to keep the adequate airspeed. So you fly the airspeed, but you get used to the power settings. You know, like I might fly the approach at 15 inches of manifold pressure with the gear down, and I know that if I hold my nose right about the right on the horizon, I might be flying at 95 miles an hour, which is where I want to be, say. And then I just look down every once in a while and I reference this. But if you're doing an instrument approach, then you use this. You really use all these 6 instruments right here. This is an engine analyzer. It's kind of neat. I can't. The engines aren't running. It shows all 6 cylinders. It shows the each of the temperatures, the cylinder head temperature, the exhaust gas temperature, fuel flow, oil pressure, all that stuff for each engine. Let's see, what else is there? That's about it. The old analog gauges, or steam gauges as people call them, they're pretty boring without a glass cockpit. They're much more exciting. The vintage, this is sort of the new generation stuff, although this is probably 10 years old now. I put it in 2002, so it's 8 years old, but 2003, so it's 7 years old, but the technology was around for several years before I put it in. You know, the technology was.
So when you land, do you always need to land by sight, or can you use the screen to help you? Or
No, you have to land by sight.
Okay.
Some of the airliners can do Category 3, what they call Category 3 approaches, where they go right down to the ground, and the airplane does it automatically. But you know, the autopilot and navigation equipment on that airplane is probably worth 10 or 20 times what this airplane is worth. You know, I mean, they're in the millions of dollars.
And in terms of communications, I know, back when I was a kid, everything was analog. You could actually hear it if you had a multi-band radio. Has a lot of the communication switched digital in the last 20 years, or is it still kind of analog signal? Or?
No, well, I mean, they're all analog signal.
Okay.
But this is as digital as you're going to get.
Okay.
Yeah, they're FM. They're not AM. Yeah, they're not digital.
Okay, so you can still pick up airline chatter if you want to off of a,
Sure, because we're on the
multi-band.
same. Yeah, we're on the same frequencies. Yeah.
Okay.
The bigger brother of this is put out by a company called Garmin, and they have some really nice stuff now. This is kind of like the newborn of the family. This, in terms of baby brother, the bigger brother, which is really the toddler. That has the features that you could do an overlay for traffic avoidance. But then when you get up to the really high-end stuff, and this is relatively inexpensive as aircraft instruments go. I mean, it's like, to put another one in, it's like $13,000 or $14,000. So for an airplane, that's pretty cheap. You put the bigger brother in, you're looking at $16,000, $17,000, $18,000. If you put the high-end stuff in, you're looking at $30,000 to $35,000, $40,000. And then you can add on. See, you can't add on much here. Because it knew where it was when we left. it's not picking up any GPS, but so it's a moving map kind of thing. So as the airplane flies, the map moves underneath it. So, but the newer ones, and you'll see when we get back to school, you'll see the newer ones are much bigger.